Welcome to Let's Talk Democracy, the show where we have meaningful conversations on democracy. I'm your host, Tina Johnson. And each week, we're joined by people who are doing the hard work of building healthy democratic environments. With insightful guests, expert advice, and thought-provoking conversations, we dive deep into the heart of democracy. Whether you're here to learn or to get inspired, we've got something for you. Let's jump in and explore today's episode. It's no secret that democracy, the cornerstone of many modern societies, is facing unprecedented challenges. From rising populism to shifting global dynamics, the question we're all asking is, why is democracy under attack? In today's episode, we're diving deep into this critical question. I want to understand the forces driving this shift in attitude toward democracy, and why the democratic principles that many of us have long taken for granted now seem increasingly fragile. But this doesn't happen in a vacuum. To truly grasp the current landscape, we need to look at the historical context and understand how the pendulum has swung, not just in terms of policies, but in the very way we think about society. From the collective we to the individual I, or as 50 Cent the rapper put it, get rich or die trying. What are the impacts of these changes, and how have they reshaped the way we view governance, democracy, and the relationship between citizens and the state? That's what we'll be exploring today. So grab your headphones and get ready for a thought-provoking conversation. Today's conversation is on democracy in flux. I'm joined by Mvemba Dizolele, a senior fellow and director of the Africa program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. We'll be discussing the dynamic state of world politics and the challenges faced by countries trying to balance the old and new ideologies in a rapidly transforming global order. Hey, Mvemba.
Hello, Tina.
Thanks for joining me on this podcast today. I'm excited to talk to you. I thought, who can talk about where we are politically today with the new administration in the United States, but also the global context of what's happening. So I thought Mvemba Dizolele would be the perfect person to have this conversation with. And so the first thing I want to ask you is, what the hell is going on? Where are all of these political shifts coming from? And then what are those impacts?
Well, thank you for having me, Tina. It's a pleasure to join you on your podcast. The world is in flux. The world is in flux. If we're to use the image of a pendulum, the pendulum is swinging. It's swinging. It's not stopped yet, but it's swinging far, far, far. Whether we call it right or far left doesn't really matter, but it's swinging in a different direction from where it was before. So what we're seeing is a shift, and maybe everything is being turned upside down in terms of values. So if you compare, let's say, the 60s to today, the 60s were marked by high levels of idealism. It didn't matter what you believe, whether you were a communist, a socialist, idealist, whatever, but there was more of idealism. People believe in the ism very deeply. So whether you're talking about Fidel Castro in Cuba, Che Guevara, whether you're talking about Mobutu in Congo, whether you're talking about the Kwame Nkrumah, all the luminaries that you can name, Nikita Khrushchev, all those guys, no matter the age, no matter how young they were, they fully believed in something, including Woodstock and hippies. There was a sense, it was not about shares. It's not about conquering the other. It was, we believe in this self-evident truth that we hold so dear to us. We think this will make a better world, and we're going to go fight for it. That was that world. And since then, we've gradually continued moving in another direction that is not into this ism necessarily. And by this ism, I'm talking about this ideal thing. All those isms have their ups and downs and negatives and pluses, which is normal for every system of thought. But one thing that they had in common, they deeply believe in set of values that they believe will make the world a better place. There was a sense of making the world a better place. And somewhere, somehow, we found ourselves here. where, in my view, it just anything goes. It's might makes right. It's I want more shares. I don't care about what it is. It doesn't matter if you're in the industry, business, military, politics. It's just like I will take it. You give it to me, I'll take it. End of story. My position, it's the only one. Everybody else out. But there are no values in the traditional sense of those words that are including that. There's no ism in it, right? So you see the rise of things that we thought was done with. You can take people's territory, just move in there, grab it. Today, in a place like the United States, the narrative is changing. Take Greenland. We're going to do Panama Canal. Why don't you do this? It's about if you're strong, then why not? So it's like, okay, everybody for himself.
Can you pinpoint when that changed from we believe in something that ism to it's every person for themselves, every country for themselves?
It's hard to pinpoint. History comes in big epochs, era, periods. So it's not just one specific moment. It typically gradual, and then some things start becoming normal. Something that was kind of, whoa, that doesn't sound right. And then somebody else does it. And then somebody else does it. It's becoming part of the empirical evidence. Well, they've done it. You start setting precedents all over the place. If I were to venture and guess, I think the fall of the Berlin Wall, just not this physical part of it only, but the symbolism of everything that followed was very interesting. I was just in Berlin a few days ago and went to the Brandenburg Gate. And it's very interesting to see that, because if you go to that segment and you see, first of all, what's there are all these embassies, magnificent buildings. But these are buildings that are embassies of the victors. France is right. I think if you count, your embassy is gonna be right on that strip. If you don't count, then you're not there. So it's kind of reminiscent of, there was a world order here at one point that was dominated by this handful of countries. I was even surprised when I was there to see a building with Aeroflot on top of it. Aeroflot is the Russian airline company. Well, at one point, Aeroflot was a big deal because it was the means to which the Russian system connected the rest of the world to their world. But it's still there. So it was almost a vestige of the past as much as it's very much part of the world that we live today in the way that it did define the world we live today. So what am I saying? I'm saying you had that end of the Cold War, but yet you had these powers that continue to try to cling to that world that was no more, that was mutating. So that's 89. The world is trying to reshape itself. You have powers that are supposed to be dying, but they're not quite dying, and they're clinging on. So the Soviet Union was no more, but the Russian Federation was born. The Commonwealth of those states were born. You had institutions struggling with death, but not wanting to go. Nobody's giving them that push like you need to. There's not enough push for them. If we use the image of somebody's dying, there's a process of helping people die. At one point, people don't want to die, even though they're dying. So the nurse comes and gives them morphine. We make it easier for them. Those of us who have to cry over the departure, we hold their hand. We even assures them that it's going to be okay for them to go. I think there got to be a process for institutions and dying order to ease them into going away because they served their time. It's the end of the cycle. And we don't have that. I think it's impossible to have it, but I'm just using the analogy here. It's like, if your country is dying now, how do we make it painless? As painless as we can for the populations, for all the system that's in place. If this used to be a Soviet republic, is no longer a Soviet republic, is going to become independent. Well, the Soviet republic has to die so the new independent country can emerge. We see elements of this in places like Georgia, in those areas of old Soviet Union. It's like there's the new that is coming, but the old is not making place for the new. So you end up in this system that is very violent. It's a very violent process. Every 2 years, there's a revolution that didn't quite materialize. There's Russia that moves in there. And you see this across the world. You see this in the US. You see this where, okay, do we continue waging war? Do we retract ourselves from the plan? Should there be retrenchment? Should there be more engagement? All this gives and takes are making it so difficult for the old to die and new to come in. What do you do with the industry? The industry that built America, that gave space to the middle class to rise so that the middle class will feel like they're stakeholder in this country. This is the Norman Rockwell pictures and paintings and all the poems that went to America is a unified place. You made your entire career in one place. You went to GE, you worked there, and you made a good life. Your kids went to college, you have a house. You didn't have a lot, but you had enough for you to suffice and to have a good life and love America. Well, that stuff has changed. We see the gap between the worker and the CEO. Like you wonder, is the CEO doing all the work by himself? You know, what happened here? Why he took this thing to the height? What height did he take the thing? We, the workers, put this thing, the engineers, and everybody took this to the height, right? So we see this even in, again, if we stay with industry, you look at the airlines industry in the United States. We're supposed to have consumer protection. But there's no consumer protection because you show up your bag, they're charging you for your bag, even though the airplane was built to carry the bag. So next thing you know, everybody is chaotic when they get into the plane because nobody wants to check in their bag. By the time you get to your seat, you have no space for you to put your bag, and you have no place to complain because they also put you in all kinds of groups, group 1, group 2, and half the time those groups make no sense except this guys travel a lot, so they put him in gold status. You are a second-class citizen on the same airplane. You are all flying economy. But even that economy, it's no longer that we are all kind of on the same level here. It's like, no, I am. And yeah, you want to sit on the aisle. By the way, we're going to charge you another $75.
Or you have to pay for a bottle of water.
Exactly. You have to pay for everything. Bring your own pizza. It's like, okay, how do we turn everything into a bus? Right. So there's this thing, you see it across the board. That's my assessment. Just like the world is really upside down and is not fully tumbling yet. It puts you in all kind of uncomfortable position. But instead of going to the full circle is not materializing. So there's no full revolution. And I'm talking about revolution in the physical sense of the word. The revolution, you have to go all around the circle to have it, right? That's the revolution. But ours is not that. They're just tumbling halfway. And that's created discomfort around the world. And systems and people fight back. And that has repercussion on the democratic processes that we have around the world.
When you said it started with the fall of the Berlin Wall, during that time, you have a real push, the then President Reagan and Prime Minister Thatcher in England, around market capitalism as the Berlin Wall is falling. And I'm wondering where or how that ideology of the way we will design our economies also has an impact on destroying the ism of we take care of each other, we grow together, because it's happening at the same time. So you have the fall of the Berlin Wall. It opens up for markets. Russia gets a McDonald's. Everything in Russia becomes privatized.
A lot of stuff supposedly become privatized.
Well, do you know what I mean? But there's a lot going on in that time that's centered in the economic structure of that period as well. And that is the markets, the shares, the people suddenly become individualized, but seen as a collective when it comes to corporate investment, where dollars are being sent to build or to construct or support or undergird the economics or the economies of emerging or new markets. And I would like to know what your thoughts are on that, because I think that's a direct link at that time. If it had happened,
Absolutely. So the ism you describe, when I talk about the ism and people being committed to some values, this ism, there were battle of isms as well. It was not just a comfortable life. We call it the Cold War. Cold War had ramification across the board, not just in the politics, but in economics. And there were two major sets of values in that time: capitalism and communism. If we just put two buckets for the sake of softening the discussion. I mean, in the meantime, you had social democracies. You have places like Norway. They decide we don't want to be either this or that. We're going to find something in the middle. Yeah, we want to be democracy. We also want to take care of our people, and we don't think we're going to leave anybody behind. So they embrace that in their own way. And then you had countries that decided they're going to be non-aligned. And that just not in terms of countries, but individuals who also took this position. Today, we call them independent. Right? In America, we call them independent. That's what really they are. They're like, we are non-aligned individuals. We are neither with the right or the left. But if we go to the ism to your question, market economy, which is the ism itself, is capitalism. That was in fight in the major conflict with the other element, which is communism or planned economy, if we want to call it that way. Eventually, with the collapse of the Berlin Wall, one of the sides won, at least at that time, and with the capitalism. So when you talk about Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, they represented a certain school of thought, which was very clear. Because the other system was dying, they decided we're going to drive them all the way to the end. So that's the McDonald's opening in Moscow. That's Ford going to China. That's John Deere. Today, you end up with a system where, in the case of Russia and the former Soviet, a big chunk of them, the elite also embrace this new ism. It's not new to them, the market opening up. So you have the rise of the oligarch. So that's the privatization you were talking about, the rise of the oligarchs. You have a new class of really powerful people, but all of them are anchored into the political elite, right? They depend on the state to be oligarchs in so many ways. They cannot just depart, be fully independent because it's the Gazprom, you name the organization, is the Aeroflot. It's all these things that are being somewhat privatized, creating a new class of economic tycoons who have a lot to say, but in alignment with what the Kremlin wants. You cannot just go there freelancing and doing your own thing. It doesn't work that way. So that also has ramification. We saw a lot of unhappiness in that space as well. But that thing, as much as it's affecting that part of the world, is also driving the gap in a place like the United States, where it's all about shares, it's about, in many ways, we can bring this to the streets. We can bring this to 50 Cent. 50 Cent has created a motto that a lot of parts in the world have adopted, which is get rich or die trying. Get rich or die trying, it sounds street, but it's actually the reality that the world is living in, particularly in the Western world. Get as much as you can. If you can't, at least give the effort so that even if you don't succeed, we know you gave it a good try. That means people want material wealth. People want a certain level of comfort in their lives. People want to have access to all the gadgets. People want, a place like Africa where the median age is 19, sometimes even younger. Those kids are not looking up to China, or they may be on Huawei phones, but they're not dreaming to go to China to school or to do things. They're still embracing this ism, this 50 centism of, getting rich. In other words, get wealthy, make yourself comfortable, at least try. Don't settle for less. And that is driving a certain rush to something which is hard to pin down. Yeah? It's not just the material. So the kid in Mozambique, the kids in Niger, the kids in Senegal knows all about Kim Kardashian and the wealthy life that they lead. They know very little about what's happening in Vietnam, in China, and at the other places. And speaking of a place like Vietnam, is another example of this. Yeah, this is a communist country. They're unabashedly communist. They're not going to apologize to anyone. They've also fully embraced this market economy. They're one of the countries that is always pointed at as a rising example, as a shining example of how planned economy, when they mix with good market standard, can become really. So what do you make of Vietnam? Vietnam is different from Cuba, right? Cuba is the other way. Maybe Cuba's curse was to be so close to the United States and so far from God. I don't know. And as everybody says about Mexico, but Vietnam somehow has managed to capitalize on both worlds.
One of the things I'm thinking about and why I started this podcast is how all of the things that you just said have contributed to this rise in the political, I'm going to call it an unevenness, an imbalance in what people say that they want, if it's to get rich or die trying, and then saying, and I'm okay having far right politics and policy that in essence will hinder my ability to get rich or die trying. Like there is a conflict and a contradiction here happening at the same time.
There is, but at the same time, there's alignment to that. Because get rich or die trying and the rise of the, let's call it the extreme right, just for lack of better words. I'm sure there's a better way to do it. But there's a rise of anti-globalist right across the world, right? These are anti-immigrants. They think that if you believe the talks we're having now to them will be like, what kind of nonsense is that? Why do we even care about what's happening in other parts of the world? We are here. We see this in the anti-immigration policies. This is the new ism in many ways, right? It's still rising. We are the beginning. We're probably midway because it's been rising for years. Yeah, you go to places like France with égalité, liberté, fraternité, all that stuff. But the reality, you end up with the yellow vest. You end up with the yellow vest at the same time Marine Le Pen is rising and making serious headways into the political realm, getting votes, even coming close to forming a government. And this is happening in France, right? So those things are not mutually exclusive in the sense that if you are the right here, the impression the right have is like the government is too big, they're standing on the way. If only we have these millionaires who are going to lead us, they know how to fix this. Well, the millionaires are all into the ism of, I want to get as much of shares of this place, including the country. I want the government out of my life, out of my business, so we can do whatever we want, fly to space, conquer space. In the meantime, poo-poo on everybody on earth here, pay you the bare minimum, lift everything else that is a hindrance to us. So much that in the middle of COVID, for instance, a big pandemic, there was more debate about giving people $300 extra per week to survive, because the same elite that believes in this get rich or die trying are saying, no, if you give them that money, it's going to disincentivize them from work. Nobody's going to work if they give an extra 300. But by God, let's save the airlines. The airlines are in trouble. What pandemic? How pandemic affects human beings? Doesn't affect planes. Planes don't get COVID. And these are companies that have billions of dollars of reserves, but somehow we're gonna bail them before they've even is a crisis. There's no proof of any crisis. So that entire system is catered. Yet there's some people out there who are saying, these are the people we want. They will make our lives better. There's no evidence of them making our lives better. So it goes back to the Reagan, right? Your question about Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. In their case, they said they're going to be trickle-down effect. We all will benefit. Rising tides will lift all boats and blah, blah, blah. Where rising tide in this case mean big manufacturer coming to your neighborhood, displacing people, not paying them the right amount. The entire economic environmental justice movement started because people were not compensated properly. These companies are willing to continue becoming bigger and bigger and bigger at our cost, at the expense of the population, whether to pollution, to everything. So today, in a place like the United States, they're saying we want our country back. And our country back means we're going to build walls, our country back means we will do tit for tat for everyone. We don't want to be the superpower that is setting the course. We just want to set the course for ourselves, not for the world. Whatever is good to us, that's enough. Again, we're going to get richer or die trying, but we don't want you to be part of this thing. You're only going to be part of this in as much you're adding value to us in making us richer. So it has both the institutional dimension to it as much as just that human dimension. Yeah, saving an airline that doesn't need any help, but then when you save them at the expense of the taxpayer, they jack up the price. They do everything. They don't even invest in creating jobs.
And
They
then
do
they get
buyback.
bonuses.
They do bonuses. They do buyback. So
Yeah.
totally the opposite everything. I think that is the extreme side of that ism you were talking about, Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher.
But I think it's interesting that it is the extreme version of that. The contradiction that lives there is that the very folks that are extracting from, in this instance, what we're talking about, the American people, are the very people they're saying are going to save them. Like giving access to your taxpayer dollars into the federal government, in this case, to, in theory, provide services for and on behalf of the American constituencies, that there's not an understanding or a clarity that we've just invited the fox into the hen house to guard it, when they're the ones that are closing the factories that you say you want your job back in, or they're the ones shipping your job overseas that you say you want to have come back into the United States, that somehow it's the immigrants who are shipping your jobs overseas, or your neighbor who is from Ghana. It's very muddled in a way that makes this ism of get rich or die trying not just complicated, but asinine.
It is for sure complicated. It's also compartmentalized. So the anti-immigrant rise within the rise of the right, which are called the extreme right for this conversation, they think it's the brown people who are causing them trouble, right? So they think, so you go to a place like France, I'm going to stick to France, but Germany and others, they think it's all these people who are coming here that are making our lives difficult. That's why Macron is doing this. That's why they're doing this. We don't have enough social services because there are too many of them. In the case of Germany, we saw Angela Merkel party. They were in deep trouble because they accepted the Syrians. But the reality is the people are moving from the far reaches of Africa, crossing the Mediterranean or the Atlantic to go to Brazil and come up to the Darien Gap, or crossing the Mediterranean, or if not, sinking in the Mediterranean, dying. They're dying because the liberal economic order is affecting them as much as affecting the people in France and in Germany, right? Or in the United States. So all the closing of the job, the reduction of the social services, that they're blaming it on those Africans or those Asians who are showing up, when the reality, it's the same system that is failing both sides.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the politician, when in the packaging of the messaging, they're not being truthful to people, right? And also the advocacy is not strong enough to educate the people, the populations, in no, this is actually not what's happening. What's happening is your country here was taking advantage of all these former colonies that for all intent and purposes have remained colonies, maybe neo-colonies we call them, extracting the resources. And those people are saying no, that is causing, there's the rise, a big emergence of a big swath of youth all over Africa. They have no employment. They have this, in part because of mismanagement of their own government in those countries, but in part because there's a world order that is causing a lot of problems. It's debt, the rise of debt, like government are just sinking, drowning in debt, that they spend more servicing the debt, the public debt, and that leaves them no money to put in the social services in their own country. Meanwhile, these countries in the West are also struggling with other new rises of power, like China, India, that are also tapping into those same resources. So there's a disconnect there. So the result is you have the Marine Le Pen who continue pointing to this immigrant, but then you have the yellow vests who are saying, where's the social services? Where's it? So everybody somewhere along the line is thinking is the other. That is a serious problem. At the same time, the old system doesn't want to die. That analogy I was talking about death. They're still talking like we're the middle power here. We need to do X, Y, Z. France is kind of an example of that because France, unlike Germany, is continued to be a colonial power in its thinking. Yeah. And all those ramifications are popping up. Now, France is not alone. The rise of the extreme rights is the United States. They got tremendous mandate in the last election. You find this in all the European countries. You go all the way to Hungary. That rise is it's almost unstoppable at this time. That's also part of that swing of the pendulum. And I don't know how far we are from the pendulum swinging back, but I think we're still going because things have not settled yet.
I want to unpack that a bit because I do think that this idea of a mandate towards the far right ideology as a way in which you govern is problematic because it's not about governance. It's wrapped as a policy mandate, but in fact, it's ideological perspectives on how the world should look. And then politicians saying, and the way we're going to get there is if we do this. And what that looks like is having really strong anti-immigration laws, reducing the number of employees in the federal government, which is what the U.S. is doing right now. And I think that is a conflict also in understanding that white nationalism or far-right nationalism is an ideology that is not about governing. And as far as politicians taking it and saying it's our mandate to govern with these ideologies, that's not policy.
Correct.
That's a huge
absolutely.
conflict. Because it's this conflict that exists and people are taking it on as if it is governance. It has created this disconnect, which we were talking about on those two sides, where each side is being screwed. If we're talking about migration, the receiving country is being taken advantage of. The country of origin, it's the destination country and the country of departure. The regular person is working to find a way to better their lives or to have the systems work. But in France, we'll go back to France, their social services aren't being used up by refugees or asylum seekers or migrants. It's being used up because there's no investment in that system. Because they've said, we're going to reduce that investment. We're not going to put enough money there. We're going to give tax breaks to the rich people. And then on the side of the quote unquote, the global south, if they have a financial crisis, they have to take money from the World Bank. Then you need to do these austerity measures to lower your costs so that you can pay back this debt, which means that you're lowering the resources available to your population. That's part of that not really understanding what's happening. And
absolutely. You describe it well, and there's no solution at this point. It's just those two worlds are in conflict. They're in a fight. And one world refuses to die. In other words, is not fully emerged. So you get a limbo that is violent in quote unquote ways. Violent on people's lives because people are losing their livelihoods. People, every time a country cannot invest in education, you're creating an entire caste of downtrodden, right? Every time you cannot invest in your public health properly, well, you can. But it's also, at the same time, it's speaking about African countries, there have been some issues with mismanagement of their own resources. The leadership is also in its own limbo. That's actually an element that we've not spoken about, is the failure of leadership across the continent as well. There's a leadership that is more interested in getting richer or die trying than in actually serving the population. So what is come to be known in management and other fields as servant leadership, there's not a lot of that emerging in the global south, and definitely not in Africa. There are exceptions, but the rule is such as a lot of the national leaderships in a lot of these countries are much more in the 50-cent model, and they've adopted that motto for themselves as individuals, so much that even the government has become a money-making scheme for the leaders, not an institution that is designed to uphold the social contract. And I think in many ways, that is same probably you're describing here. People think this is about governance. Governance is about the social contract. The people who embrace that ism are not about the social contract. It's about maximizing profit. Maximizing profit is not a contract. It's not a social contract. It's an economic contract of a different sort.
It's an economic contract of a different sort that has been communicated as if it's the contract that is the social contract of obligation of governance. And if we, for a moment, could not live in idealism, but think about what needs to happen in order for that shift away from the I back towards the we, to establishing or reestablishing that social contract. And I want to preface this by saying that even conservatives have said that the neoliberal monetary or economic system doesn't work. There's an acknowledgement. People know it. But so with that said, like, it doesn't work. What would be the way forward to reestablishing that social contract, that governance structure that really takes care of not the airplane, but the people? Right?
Airplane protect airplane from COVID. We need
Yeah.
to.
Give them a big face mask.
Exactly. Look, it's a good question, Tina. I don't think we have answers to that. I think it's still, this is where the revolutions become important, right? And revolutions always go the extreme as well. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is to that. I think people organizing is a key. People will continue fighting in places like the United States where people still have courts. People hope that courts will continue to play their role. It's not always evident. I mean, court, of course, doesn't mean always they agree with the people. Sometimes they agree with the other side. But I think we see there are still a fighting spirits in a lot of the advocacy world that are saying, okay, as long as there are laws in this country, as long as we still accept the rule of law as kind of the basis upon which we're going to build our social contract, we'll continue knocking on the doors of the various courts and trying to get reprieve on this. I think that's one way. It's a traditional institutional way, but it's the one way you get the attention of the rule of law. It's the checks and the balances. The other way is just all the revolutions that mobilization that we'll continue seeing. The challenge is if you end up with that oligarch class. Of course, we use the oligarch class in places like Russia, but there are oligarch classes all over the place. They just have different names. We can call them the industry. You can call them whatever you want to call them. It's the same
Captain
thing.
of industries, the elite.
Yeah, captain industry, the elite, the nano, whatever, plutocrats, and The problem, one of the biggest risks is what the US is undergoing now, where that two worlds kind of merge. So when you have the Elon Musk of the world, if you look at the image of the inauguration of President Trump and seeing who are the forefront in that crowd, they were the tech billionaires and so on. What does that mean? What does that mean for you write on Amazon? What does that mean for the airplanes as we're talking about? If Elon Musk is going to lead Doge as he is doing, and we have all these people being fired, so to speak, buy out, whatever the terms can be, the result is the same, right? People are losing their jobs. It's a major shift. We've not even done even not a quarter of the term. It's only like been a handful of institutions that have been touched now. So when you have that kind of situation, where is the contract? Is the contract in the mandate that came to the elections, or is the social contract in the effect that this is having? Where is the accountability? Accountability to whom? Where are the checks and balances? How far will this go? What does that mean? Is efficiency only, is it only measures in the way corporate America sees it? Because those are not always the same thing. What are the fundamentals of governance? Are the fundamentals of governance driven by a vision of billionaires and technocrats? Or is the fundamentals of governance driven by the result, reduction of waste and all? Because the narrative definitely addresses issues that people would like. People want transparency. People want government that work and not waste. Because waste is also a cost to the population. That money that has been wasted could have been put to use for things that promote the social contract much better. So that entire process is also one of conflict. And how it's going to be resolved, I think time will tell.
Yeah, I think that time will tell. And one of the things that I am very hopeful for in the US's context is for the next midterm election, because 435 seats are up. So all of the House is up, and I think there's 35 Senate seats up. That is a way in which folks can engage in social responsibility of ensuring that the social contract does continue and does exist. And I also think it's an opportunity for people to fully understand that governance is policy that improves their lives because it's part of the social contract. I remember something Obama said as he was leaving his second term of office. Government is not business. It cannot be run as a business. And I think that what we've seen over the last few weeks, the purging and the firing of employees who allow for governance to actually happen. I'm not saying there's not waste, but that allows for there to be consistency and congruency in the way in which governance is available to populations within the United States and around the world. They begin to understand that, getting rid of them means that you reduce your social contract, you reduce your access to a governance system that actually respects the purpose it serves, which is to be there for you. And I'm not saying it's always there for folks. There's lots of examples when it's not been there, but that is the idea. I wanted to ask you about that social contract in the context of Africa, because there have been articles that I've read and reporting that there might be an African Spring like there was for the Arab Spring. And if that does happen, is that connected to what we're talking about right now?
There've always been African Springs. The entire Arab Spring started in Africa. So it's I think I don't understand what people mean when they say maybe Africa Spring. African youth have been engaging. I mean, literally starting with the Arab Spring. It was Tunisia. Tunisia is Africa. I mean, it may be North Africa, it's still Africa. Then it migrated to Egypt. That was Africa before it went everywhere else. And everywhere where it actually had the biggest impact was on the continent. But then since then, you have a lot of youth mobilization movement. Africa had been mobilizing over these things since the 90s, way before people start dubbing them spring this, winter that. Yeah, it was people were mobilizing. You have what they call the country like Benin, which doesn't get enough credit for. Benin was one of the first countries in the world. The Republic of Benin was one of the first countries in the world to topple a dictator through non-violent means, in a way that they reclaimed their lives, they reclaimed the politics. The dictator stepped down. The church took on an important role with Cardinal de Souza. They set the gold standards for all the other African countries to try to do what they call, back then they called them Conférence Nationale Souveraine. national sovereign conferences. It was big. It was success in. It was a big success in Benin. It failed almost everywhere else in Africa because people cut and pasted. This is the problem. Part of the problem with the change is you cannot have cut and paste model to change, because change has to be, while there are a lot of similarities with these problems of debt and dictatorships, they're not the same. So just because Benin did their thing with a Catholic church and the Archbishop, the Cardinal de Souza of Benin, doesn't mean Congo needs to do the same thing. The moment you cut and paste, then it doesn't work. But Africans have been doing this. And then you've seen tremendous youth mobilization across Africa. You see Ballet Citoyen in places like Burkina Faso that helped kick the dictatorship. A dictator who had been there for 27 years or plus. I don't remember exactly the number. You had Yanamar in Senegal that managed to deny two president constitutional change, because the two presidents wanted to cling on, Abdoulaye Wade, he wanted to change the constitution. The youth stepped in. They were not the only people who stepped in. But when you consider how young these countries are, the youth were a very important, critical part of this thing. You have Nigeria. As recently, we had End SARS. This was galvanized around police brutality. You have the DRC with Lucha. You have South Africa with Fees Must Fall. So you never know what the trigger points are. The trigger point in South Africa was like fees must fall, which means student fees were too high. But student fees rising is a symptom of all the problems that you've been describing in terms of governance. So while the students may not go for the vote, they're going for something that is close to them, that is affecting directly. Roads must fall, about the exploitation of things. So Africa is just bubbling with all kinds of mobilization. You go to Uganda with the People's Movement, with Bobby Wine. Sudan, we saw this, right? In Sudan, we saw the entire revolution, women at the forefront, professional associations, youth movement. So it's there. The question is, how come they don't have staying power? Because they do well in the short term, make a big impact, and then for a number of reasons, this movement seems to fizzle.
Do you think that will change because there are so many constituencies around the globe now who are facing, in the US they call it a constitutional crisis, but a crisis of democracy? And I don't mean democracy as in American democracy or Western democracy, but democracy as in the form that they have chosen to govern their countries by. But there's a connectedness happening around the globe at the same time that could potentially provide that staying power for change?
I prefer to talk about crisis of governance. Democracy gets too muddled as a concept, and often we're not even sure what we're talking about. When I work in that space, we call it democracy and good governance space, the DNG. And it's the governance that is the problem. It's not people going to vote that is the problem. People vote and they always end up with the same dictator who was there before. So what we've seen, for instance, is countries where there's good governance do better than countries that just don't. Even if you take a country like Botswana, which is often touted as an excellent example of a rich country because they have diamond and they've not gone the way of other countries that have mismanaged their resources. So there's no talk of resource curse, because I don't believe in resource curse. It's the mismanagement of it, the equitable distribution of resources, of revenues that you get after, the rent you get after the resources, is equitable access to all the institutions that are designed to promote the social contract, education, the military, and so on. So, I was in Mali not too long ago. Mali now is under military leadership. As my colleague and I were speaking to the people, our informants who were interviewing people for a report we're doing, we happened to be there the day the election should have happened, at the military leadership kept the schedule, the electoral schedule. So we ask people, are you guys disappointed that you have no election today and blah, blah? And they said, no, why should we be disappointed? We're like, well, why not? India have election. They was like, we've had elections before, many of them. And those elections always led us here. So we are more interested in giving this military an opportunity to change things, the anti-corruption and stuff. That is the governance issues. China has governance. China is not a democracy. China has governance. So billions of people, literally, right? A billion, what's the population there? A billion point something. People are being lifted out of poverty. People have access to Huawei phone. People have access to WeChat. And people go to school. We see thousands and thousands of Chinese students. You're a Chinese student classmate. I had Chinese student classmates in the US. You multiply that from around the world. You go to France, thousands of Chinese students. You go to UK, they're investing in their people. That is governance. We don't have that in a lot of African countries. So the investment in people is very limited. That's the failure of the governance. You cannot protect your people. You're not buying the right weapon system. You underinvest in your police. You underinvest in youth. You underinvest in public health. So whether you have elections or not, the challenge is you're talking about the West. Election in the West will say they had election, even though there were some irregularities, which will not have changed the result. What does that mean? It will not have changed the result. And what does that mean the day after? The day after, things have not changed.
I'm using the term democracy in the sense that is a rallying cry, it seems, thing that folks are like not thinking of it as separate from governance. I appreciate the way you've just clearly stated that, because I do understand, just like you do, that it's not the same. But as in terms of having something to hold on to when groups take to the streets and they put their bodies on the line in protest because they aren't being governed, what is the possible connective tissue for them to continue to push beyond the initial inertia of the protest to getting to change?
It's just the daily reality that is going to continue to be the thread. I mean, we have abstract concepts, and then we have the realities of our lives. In the end, that's what determines. If you're being, pummeled by the police, that's a reality. That's what democracy or lack thereof means. If you cannot have access to school because the state just A, has not built schools or enough, or B, the entire process of admission is skewed to favor certain groups, or you cannot join the military even though as much as you want to, because the academy is limited in terms of who they take, or they favor one region or one ethnic group or one religion. So long as those things don't change, those will continue to be the triggers for the youth, for the population to mobilize. As long as countries like Niger cannot sell the uranium at the right price so that they can take care of their people. Niger has one of the highest fertility rates in the world. The problem will continue. Discontent will continue to rise. It will be either the street changes the course of the country, or the military changes the course of the country. The military has an advantage because they have weapons. They're not afraid of the police. They can do things. That doesn't mean necessarily that they bring the right solution also. But when democracy, as you just described it, has failed, in a lot of these places, they pretty much say, let's try something else, anything. So people are willing to welcome things that may not make sense to the rest of us, but it's like, because we've tried the other one, it didn't really work that well. It is also true that often the other side, meaning democracy, has not really been tried, right? Because it's always half-baked. It's not fully, it's not the elections on it's like you were talking about, it's a social contract. How do people get represented and what they want to be implemented? But democracy also has a challenge, and we have spent a lot of time talking about the rise of the right. Alexis de Tocqueville talked about democracy, the main problem democracy being the tyranny of the majority. Just because most people want this doesn't mean it's good for everyone in the system, or it's even good for the system. And that's part of what we're struggling with. That's part of what we've struggled through this conversation. Is okay, so you have the mandate, people voted for you. What does it even mean? What did they really vote for? We see now people in a place like the US where people ask us, oh, you voted for this. Is this what you had in mind? They're like, no, this is not what. You have people with single issue interests. But election is not about one issue. Governance is not about one issue.
Yeah, I think that's I think that one issue voter really probably needs a civics course, because it's like, if we could all vote one issue, but we can't. You vote for governance, you don't vote for that one thing that matters to you, because it's not necessarily the thing that is going to have the greatest impact on you. But I do want to ask you before we close, if you could wave a magic wand and say this would be something as a positive way forward through the process that we currently are in, what would that be?
Change the metrics through which we measure progress. The metrics we use are heavily economic and heavily quantitative. Sticking with Africa, where I do most of my work, we say Africa, they have some of the world's fastest growing economies. Says who? Why? How? If you're in a place like Nigeria or DRC, these are countries that are well endowed, right? Natural resource wise. If you're counting the royalties that companies are paying to the government, if you're counting the amount of oil or diamond or copper or cobalt or coltan that they're producing, and the impact is having on the Western world as your metrics, then you are missing everything else, right? If you're getting your data from the World Bank office in that country, or the commercial and economics attaché at the US Embassy or the Embassy of France, then you're missing the entire picture. I always think that is more useful. There's nothing wrong with what the World Bank is putting out there. It just is not capturing the full picture. So if it's about the royalty that company X, Glencore or whatever, Shell is paying and how much they're producing, well, first of all, we know that a lot of those royalties are not ending in the right place. So they're not always going to the national treasury. So the impact on the budget is not what we'll think it should be. But if I'm going to talk to the lady in the market, I go to Wuse Market in Abuja, or I go to the Grand Marché de Bamako, and you talk to women there, they will not speak like you and me, right? They speak differently. They don't use the standard supply and demand and graphs and stuff. But they actually have a better pulse, a better sense of the pulse of the country, because they'll say, Papa, there's no money here. People are starving. And you're like, people are starving? How? How does she know people are starving? Well, if you're in a culture that eats fufu and people need flour, whether it's sorghum, millet, or maize, whatever flour they cook with their fufu with. And if in a good day, she knows that she needs to sell 20 bags of fufu, and all her colleagues in the fufu section, they know that's when people are really eating, because that's what people eat. But if she knows she no longer sells 20 bags of flour, she only sells 5 or 2 a day, that's the real crisis. That means people are not eating. That's as simple as that, regardless what the economics attaché or the commercial attaché at the French embassy says, right? But also, in a lot of these places, because of security contingencies, these diplomats, these economists don't get out of their embassies and their offices. And when they do, they go to the ministry, right? So they're not necessarily going to the market. They're not necessarily talking to the taxi driver, because they're driving their own SUV to go to the Ministry of Agriculture, get the data from the Ministry of Agriculture. Or they're going to the cocktail at the other embassy where they're talking to each other. So they're getting data that is not reflective of everyday's experience of the local. That is a gap.
I agree with it. If you have direct contact and engagement with the people who know. They know what they sell and how much their community eats or what people are buying. They understand the needs in a very concrete way. That would definitely change the approach and the way you understand problems.
And the way we try to resolve them. That's what I'll say. That's my magic wand. It's not as easy as abracadabra, but it's still a magic wand.
Thank you, Mvemba. I really appreciate having this conversation with you today.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode on democracy in flux. Understanding its history and evolution is key to recognizing the opportunities for change ahead. That is why it was important for me to have this conversation with Mvemba Dizolele. If you found this conversation insightful, don't forget to subscribe, share this episode with friends, and leave us a review. As always, you can send me an email to tina@patternchangelab.com. Together, we can change the conversation going and stay informed about the ways we can shape the future. Let's make an impact. Join me next Tuesday when I'm in conversation with Chris Rogers, educator and cultural worker from Chester, Pennsylvania. We will be talking about building bridges and embracing community wisdom. Talk with you then.